Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create two final types of graphs that you may need to create for your science class. And those are pie charts and histograms. I'm going to start off with pie charts because they're probably the easiest ones to create and also the yummiest. Pause for laughter. And so what I've got here are some data that are actually about Issaquah High School. And as you can see, it is how many students are in each of the classes. Now, remember what a pie chart is used for is it's used to show what proportion of an entire group is made up of by smaller groups within the whole. So just as before, we're going to highlight the values that we want to be in the actual chart. So I'm just going to highlight those numbers. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab, and I'm going to select my pie chart here. And I can do two-dimensional. There's three-dimensional. That's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and go with two-dimensional for now, though, because it'll make it easier to see the layout here. So I click this, and it's pretty good looking there. I'm going to definitely need to change the title up here. So I'm going to call this Students by Class at Issaquah High School. And then there's one other thing that I need to do, and that is to change these legend values down here, because they don't really tell me what those things are. I need each of those to say if it's the freshman class, the sophomore class, the junior class, or the senior class. So the easiest way to do that is to simply click on the legend so that that part of the graph is highlighted. I'm going to do one of our famous right clicks and bring up the submenu where I can select data. And then as you can see over here, move this a bit. As you can see over here, this is why it's calling each of those colors 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that, and it says what label range do you want to use. I'm going to highlight the labels that I want to be in the legend. So freshmen all the way down to seniors. I click OK. I click OK again, and maybe you noticed it already made the adjustment down here. So the freshman class is the blue one, and it's just barely over 25%. Sophomore class, just barely over. It looks like we have a pretty even distribution here of students at Issaquah High School. Now from here, you can do things like changing the colors. Like if you don't want the junior class to be gray, we can select the colors. And if I click on just that one wedge here, you can see that just the gray section is highlighted. And if I do my right click, that'll allow me to format this. So if I do format, I can click on my paint bucket here and I can change it from gray to, I don't know, how about purple? And I change it to purple, and it also changes it in the key down here in the legend. So that's pie charts. Up next is histograms. Okay, so here we are with some data that I've already entered in that we're going to use to create a histogram. These data are fake. I made these up, so if anybody gets really ambitious when we get to go back to school and they actually do this and collect these data, it's not accurate. So what is this? This is student height distribution at Issaquah High School rounded to the nearest centimeter. So imagine if you went to all of the students at school and you measured how tall they are to the nearest centimeter. They're going to fit into one of these categories. Some students are going to be 140 centimeters or below, so less than or equal to 140. Some students are going to fit into this category. They're going to be 141 to 145 centimeters tall. This is 146 to 150, and so on, all the way up to students that are 201 plus centimeters tall. I've already entered in the numbers here, the made up numbers. And then what I've also done is I've created percentages down here. So of the entire group of students, what percentage of students fall into this category right here, 166 to 170 centimeters? 20% of the students fall into this category. 14.9% fall into this category, and so on. And if you add all these up, it comes to exactly 100%. And that's one of the differences that we're going to see with histograms that are a little different than bar graphs, because a histogram is actually a type of bar graph, but it's a special type of bar graph. One of the major differences is this right here, frequency. what frequency means is essentially how common something is. So if we take this one right here as an example, we would find that 1 out of every 5 students, 20% of them, 1 out of every 5 students falls into this category right here. Right? In this category right here, just about 1 out of every 100 students falls into this category right here. So frequency is one of the differences that shows up in histograms. So I'm not going to plot these numbers in my graph. I'm going to plot the frequency numbers. So that means, as we've always done before, highlighting the numbers that I want to be in the chart. I'm going to go up to Insert. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bar graph. The reason why I'm using a bar graph is because Excel doesn't really know the difference between a histogram and a bar graph for these purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and select bar graph. And as you can see, there are definitely some additions and some changes that we need to make. I'm going to go ahead and add in the axis titles. And one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this graph and I'm going to cover up some of the data because I'm going to run out of space with this graph here. So what do I need to put up here? I'm going to need to change the title, obviously, and we're going to say that this is student height distribution at Issaquah High School. I'm going to change this title over here to say frequency, how common it is. And then I'm going to leave this axis alone for a moment because I first need to select what these values down here should be, right? Because those values, let me squeeze this down for a second, those values down here shouldn't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What they need to be is less than or equal to 140. This one needs to say 141 to 145. This one needs to say 146 to 150, and so on, all the way up to this one that should say 201 plus. So I'm going to click on this, and as we've done, we're going to do a right-click option here that brings up the little submenu where I can select data. And then as you can see here, this is why it's defaulting to 1 through 14. So I'm going to edit that. And what label range do I want to use? It's this one right here. Select all of this stuff. And then before I even do any clicking, you can see down here on the graph that it's making that it's already added in the correct labels down here. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK and OK again. Now I know what I need to put down here for my axis title, and that is height in centimeters. Now, with a histogram, one of the differences that exists between them and bar graphs is how these categories down here are set up. So if you notice, the categories in a histogram are numerical. Remember the bar graph I created on favorite pizza toppings? There were toppings like pepperoni and mushrooms and olives. Those were qualitative categories as opposed to quantitative categories. Another thing that you'll notice is that each of these categories is continuous with the ones around it and are not overlapping. So let's take, for example, this space right in between here. 171 to 175 in this bar, and then 176 to 180. Well, remember, because for the data that we collected, we rounded all of the students' heights to the nearest centimeter. So it's not possible for any student to exist in the space in between these two bars. There's no student that's going to be 175.3 centimeters because they would have rounded down and they would belong in this category. It's not possible for a student to be 175.9 because they would have rounded up and they would be in this category. So because there's no spaces in between the categories in the data, I need to change these bars so that there's no spaces literally between the bars in my chart. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little bit so we can see it a little better. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on the bars themselves. So notice they're all highlighted here. And I'm going to do a right click so that I can format the data series. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to adjust the width of the gaps between those bars. And it's as simple as taking this and dragging it all the way down to 0, and now I have a completed histogram. At this point, I can do things that are aesthetic. Maybe I want to change the color a little bit. Maybe I want to make the bars here a little bit lighter blue, and I want to make the borders maybe a little bit darker blue. That's entirely up to you. That's all just for looks. All right, so that shows you how to basically convert a bar graph into a histogram specifically so that we can show the frequency of each of those categories of the data that are collected. All right, that does it for me for the graphs. I'm going to do one final video that shows you a few other little things that you may want to think about and also gives you a few more mathematical things that you might want to do as well. All right, until then, take care.